Okay, going weiter, another shir on the same pasuk Yudalit. Neshechem tabchem u'meknechem yeshu ba'aretz asher nasan lechem Moshe bei v'hayardei. The women and the children and the cattle are going to dwell in the land that Moshe gave them on the other side of the Yardei. V'yatem b'nei Gad b'nei Ruvain chatzi shevet Menashe tavru chamushim, you'll go armed lifnei achechem, in front of your brothers. Koil Gibari Hachayel, all the strong warriors, Vazarta Maisam, and you will help them. So we spoke different inyonim about the different people that are Mechuyev and Milchama, but now I want to discuss various ha'aras and diukim in the pasuk over here, and to get a better sense of what's this pasuk trying to tell us. So we said that the idea is based on the conversation that Moshe Rabbeinu had with Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain. Yeshua is coming off of that from the Psukim. So what's going on over here? The Yeshua says one of the basic ha'aras that the Mefarshim over here ask is that the pasuk says Neshechem tabchem u'meknechem yeshu ba'oretz. Yeshua l'chayra changed from the lashon that Moshe Rabbeinu said in Parshas Dvarim. He said Yeshu ba'orechem, and he didn't say Yeshu ba'oretz. In Parshas Matis also, the pasuk says in Perek Lamed Beis pasuk Chavav, Tapenu neshenu v'chol behemtenu yiyu sham ba'ore hagila. Didn't use the term ba'oretz. And the Ramban writes over there that Moshe wasn't giving Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain. Shemoshe le'masar Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain is kol eretz sifim va'oik. Only specific cities in Eretz Hagilot, which was a Makom Mikneh, which were Ataras V'Divai, and the other areas of Ev HaYarden were left desolate. Which we spoke about what the time for this was. So l'chara it's fair back to our kasha why Yeshua says Ba'aretz. If they were only Makabel, if they only got from Moshe Rabbeinu specific cities that they can dwell in. So even though Be'etzem, Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain had permission to live on the other side of the Yarden, they only got permission to build specific cities for their children and for their wives. Even if Moshe Rabbeinu gave them more than that, but for right now, they were specific. So there's what's going on for the Shevash Kivshu and the Shevash Chilku, and then there's the Tkufa afterwards. If you want to take it a step weiter, you'll say that they already conquered the Eretz Hagilot before this, as it's mashma in Parshas Matos, and as we spoke previously. But Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain had a very specific timeline, I guess, an area where they were allowed to live, and it's mashma like this in Pasuk Tezvav that this is the land of the Yehusha that Moshe Rabbeinu was giving them. This and not anything else. And the pasuk says in Dvarim that Moshe already gave everything out, and it was kevea the gvulos. He set the boundaries and the borders for every single shevet in the Eva Hayardei. And as I stated later on in Sefer Yeshua and Perek Gimel, just that they didn't build it up yet, and Yeshua was the one that had to give them permission to build, like the Ramban says. Now, it would seem that because Moshe Rabbeinu told them that their wives can live in the cities that they built and not in the rest of the land, so then l'chayra Yeshua wouldn't have to repeat this and tell them what Moshe Rabbeinu already told them. But as we spoke, that the idea is that it wasn't that Yeshua was coming to tell them anything. He was coming to remind them, he was coming to be mazkir, to mention to them the great responsibility that they have to the rest of Klal Yisrael, because they're being makabel these areas of land outside of Eretz Yisrael. They have a much greater responsibility now to fend off the Zion Umas and to destroy them. But it was Almanaz Kain to be makabel these pieces of the land. It was Almanaz Kain that they're going to get that. So that's why the pasuk says that Neshayim are going to be Yoshev Ba'oretz. That they're going to have a specific menucha in the Eretz Achuzasa, even if they're not going to be in one specific place, but they're going to be in those cities, which was the Achuza and the Nachla, and they were going to be. It was going to be a peace for them. It wasn't going to be a milchama for them. And the Bnei Sasur Taka writes he says that Lo Omar Yisharu or Yirek Yeshvu. Yeshvu is a lashon haftacha, that they're going to sit and dwell b'shalva b'sheket, and they're not going to be afraid. They're not going to have to be worried about anything. They're not going to have to be concerned about anything. They're okay. Now the pasuk goes weiter. Asher nasan lechem Moshe, that Moshe gave them. It doesn't say Moshe Eved Hashem like the pasuk Tezvav says, because Kol's Mandap Negodim Neruvain didn't go over yet to help their brothers. The entire land wasn't given to them, or wasn't given to them entirely, in its entirety, like we mentioned earlier from the Ramban. So this time Moshe Rabbeinu gave them the Oretz. It wasn't a complete matana. So he didn't want to say, Yeshua didn't want to speak out the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu at this time when he's not giving them something when it wasn't b'shleimus. Why? Because when you give somebody only half of something that you're really supposed to be giving them, so then the simcha that they have in response to receiving it is not going to be as great. It's like they're sort of let down. Masha'enkein and Pasuk Tezvav, when he's talking about after the land is going to be given to them b'shleimus, so then the pasuk mentions the mile of that piece of land, which was chashuv and which was important because it was given to them al yidei Moshe Eved Hashem, and that Kliyakar speaks this out in pasuk Tesvav. But even though it says that Moshe gave it to them, and we could infer from that it didn't have a chashivus that it was being given al yidei Moshe Rabbeinu, but the reason is because they'll only get the rest of it if they deserve it and if they're mekayim the tonight and they do the ishtadlus that they said they're going to do. And we spoke a few times already, and it's kedai to mention again that the Eretz Yisrael only becomes we only are zeichet to the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael when Gans Klal Yisrael is living in Eretz Yisrael together. L'mashal, we have by Yovel that it's dafka when everybody's in Eretz Yisrael. That's when everybody's in Eretz Yisrael. That's when the mitzvah of Yovel is mekuyim, but not any other time. But when each person has achrayus for the second person, so then the zivug, so to speak, of Klal Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael is complete. And Pnei Moshe is Pnei Chama, that there's no chisaron. So be'etzem, we can't talk about Moshe Rabbeinu with any type of chisaron. But because they weren't mekayim, they didn't get the opportunity yet to be mekayim their mitzvah for Moshe Rabbeinu. So we're not going to call it, we're not going to refer to this idea as being done al yidei Moshe Eved Hashem. Not that it's a chisaron in Moshe, but it's a chisaron in them that they didn't carry out the tzivoy of Moshe Rabbeinu, because the divrei harav, the words of the Rebbe, the tzivoy of a Rebbe, needs to be able to go into and to be mekuyim al yidei the Talmud. And we see taka that Yeshua tried to say over the lashon hapasuk in Parshas Dvarim, Perek Gimel pasuk Yutes, that Moshe Rabbeinu says of there, Neshecha v'tapchem yeshu b'rechem shenosati lechem. And Yeshua also said that the Neshecha v'tapchem yeshu ba'aretz asher nasa lechem Moshe, that Moshe gave you, which is very similar to that lashon. But Yeshua over here had to specify more of what their chiyuvim are, that that it wasn't his idea, that the reason why he's saying this, but it's based on the previous dinim, and based on the conversation that Moshe Rabbeinu had with Negod Neruvain, and Moshe was already mitzvah them, and he's going to say a lashon that's most similar to the lashon HaTorah, but he has other things, and it's not going to be exactly like that, and also because a person's mechuyev to say it b'lashon rabbi, therefore he says it in this way. The pasuk goes weiter. Asher nosan lechem Moshe ba'oretz be'eva hayardei. The Bnei Sascha and Darchei Desecha speaks out that the pasuk says before Hashem Elokecha meniach lechem v'nosan lechem, that the nesina, the giving of the land, was dependent on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And over here the pasuk makes it sound like it's being dependent on Moshe Rabbeinu, shenosan lechem Moshe. So the pasuk previously also says ha'aretz hazois, and meaning wherever it was going to be, whatever Moshe was going to tell them, that's what they were going to get. It wasn't a shayla b'chlal. And over here it says that it was Eva Hayardek, and that's where they were. That's where it was. Why does the pasuk have to mention Eva Hayardek again? L'chara, we know where we are. We know what it is. We know what it's all about. So the emes is that the pasuk could have just said Neshechem Yishu Be'eretz Yisrael Tavru, right? But he explains that Moshe divided up the land for all the Shvatim, and the Chelik Ruvain, and the Chelik of Gad, and the Chelik of Chati Menashe were all separate from, we're all separate and all given out specific with the borders and the boundaries from Moshe Rabbeinu, like it says in Parshas Matos, Vayivnu b'nei Gad b'nei Ruvain bonu. And Moshe did this specifically because he wanted this mitzvah to be Mekayim right away. Why? Because even though they weren't be'etzem finished, even though the mitzvahs hatluyos v'aretz weren't going to be in full swing until after the Shevesh HaKivshu, Shevesh HaChilku, right? But just like by Ari Miklat, when he divided them, even though they weren't in full service yet, like Rashi says in Parshas Masei, unlike the Gemara says in Makkas, that there were 6 Ari Miklat, meaning that even though that Moshe had 3 Ari Miklat b'chayav, there were 3 Ari Miklat in Eva Yardei, they weren't kailit until Yeshua was going to divide up the land in Eretz Canaan, and he had the other 3. And because of that, that's why it was necessary to divide up the land of Bnei Gad Bnei Reuven previously to make the Ari Miklat work. And as we know that each, there were specific boundaries for the Ari Miklat, and it would have a lot to do with where the boundaries of where each Shevet was going to live. You had Betzer l'Ruveni, V'Ramos l'Godi, V'Goylan l'Manashi, like the pasuk says. And they said to Moshe, "Anachnu nechol et chushav, v'yoshav tapenu b'arei hamivtzar, and our children will sit in the fortified cities." So we see from what they said that this was their idea, that all the children and women will gather together in the Arei HaMivtzar, and they wouldn't be spread out. Why? Because if they could all be together when, not that we said before that there wasn't really anything that they would have to be afraid of now at this point, because the Kodesh Baruch Hu gave his haftacha to them. But, there were people that the husbands were far away, and maybe there were people from Eretz HaGilad that would bother them. So if they're all together, then they can join together and make sort of, not necessarily an army, but they can advocate for themselves. But if everybody's all spread out all over the place, so Hagam, in a certain sense, you want to divide up the Machana like we find by Yaakov Avinu, but over here, it wasn't necessarily because they were going to start a war, but if they would have to stick up for each other, the women would have to be together in order for them to be able to advocate for themselves, to be able to, also they had to take care of their children, so they would want to rely on each other for those things that they needed. And as we spoke before. And this is why they said to Moshe, even though they already said, but that is that they had, there were homes where they were staying, where the women and children were staying now, but they were all staying together. And maybe after the Shevesh HaKivshu and Shevesh HaChilku, they would be divided up and living in other areas. Where Kolzman, the Milchama was ongoing, so then it was much more important for the women and children to be gathered together, not because it should be easier for an enemy. We're not afraid of any enemy now, but again, like we said, and when Moshe Rabbeinu divided up the land to the Shvatim, like we said before, they didn't really need that the women and children should be together, in such close quarters. So Yeshua told them no, that only Neshechem and Tavchem are going to be sitting be'ein machrid, without any fears in the Eretz Hashanos Alechem. And each person b'fnei atzmai, and Moshe is going to be in Eva Yardei, and everybody's going to be spread out, meaning your whole concern is that they have to be together because in case Chas v'Shalom something happens. And you need to rely on each other for whatever you might need, especially if miyad tzar, But he was saying that there's no need for that. There shouldn't be any concern for that. Now we know, and he says no chazak, and he says, why does the pasuk have to say Shonasa l'cha Moshe Yardei? Because we know how badly Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to be mekayim the mitzvah of kibush and chiluk haaretz and yishuv haaretz, just that there's a gzeira on him that he wasn't allowed to. But he wanted to do as much as he can, so he wanted to divide up that land, so at least he could have a psamashu a time of the mitzvah. Now, being that they had a chiluk in Eva Yarden, so Moshe took care of that chiluk. And Chalila, that there should be anything, any michshal, any takala that should come from something that I say tzaddik was nitzdair on. So it would be good for them, because they were involved in it, it would be helpful for Moshe Rabbeinu to be Mekayim his mitzvah, to be able to get up his Shaykhas to Eretz Yisrael. So Moshe was also involved in the Chiluk Haaretz. And he goes weiter, and he says a very interesting thing. He says like this. He says, we know that when you have Tashmishe Mitzvah, it takes on a certain Kedusha. And he says that the Eretz, the actual land, was the Tashmish Mitzvah that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to be Mekayim with the mitzvah, wanted to do the mitzvah Chiluk with. And Avada, we know that just when he starts talking, that the Tashmish Mitzvah give Hatzlacha to a person. And most certainly that would hold true of the Tashmish Mitzvah of Moshe Rabbeinu. And Avada, no takala would come out of it, and nobody would get hurt by it. And we know that the enemies, lo sholtu oivim, b'maisi yadav shal Moshe, like the Gemara says in Sotah. And, so he says they don't have to be afraid of gathering all together, because the schus of Moshe Rabbeinu is going to stand to them and protect them. They don't have to be worried about anything. So that's why it says the Eib HaYarden. Because if there's a war going on, there's makom to be afraid, but you don't have to be afraid. And we're going to see later on in the Hemshech HaPsukim a specific inyan that the pasuk says Kol asher yamar es picha. So there's a shayla. The Pashtus Yeshua had a din of a melech. So even if he wasn't an actual melech, he had dinei malchus that he was able to be noyeg with. And the pasuk says that Kol asher yamar es picha, he was able to kill him. He was able to punish him. And we spoke at the very beginning that whenever you have a new manik, you never have a new leader, there's always a new opposition to that. But Moshe Rabbeinu, even though he did face a lot of opposition, even from within his own machana, but we don't find that Moshe Rabbeinu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu to punish them, or that Moshe Rabbeinu had to punish them. What ended up happening was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Yeshua this. Now even let's say by Korach, it was chaylik and the gadlus of Moshe Rabbeinu. So Hashem punished them, but Moshe Rabbeinu, there was no tzibur from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he could punish them. But by Yeshua, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him, Kol isha sheyamar es picha v'lo yishoma es tvorecha l'chol asher titzavenu yumas rak chazak ve'amat. So that's what Yeshua is telling them, that they don't have to be afraid, and that he has this from, he was doing this mitzad the dinei malchus also. Okay, now this that the Bnei Sotza writes that Tashmish Mitzvah help a person be matzliach. So he writes this in Agar de Pirke Ois Yud Ches. Agar de Pirke is a very fascinating sefer. It's just different ideas, different inyanim. It's not in any specific seder, and it's very very geschmack. It could be answering a kasha on a tosis. It could be masber a minute of why Chassidim do this, or talking hoich inyanim and Kabbalah. But it's a very fascinating sefer. So he says like this. He says you have to understand what it means to turn something into a mitzvah. He says you're a Ruv, you're a Rebbe, and he says you have people that want to be mechabed you. People want to be meshamish you, they want to take care of you. And, let's say you're traveling, they want to come with you, and you can't get away from these people. And it's really distressing, and it's really disturbing. And, befrag, because how low, you're not really deserving of this covet, but they still give you the covet. And, many times it's more difficult to tell these, you're going to hurt them more by telling them to go away than by just letting them annoy you. So he says, what do you do about this? So, this that people are following you around and trying to serve you and be mashamish you and be your gabbai or whatever it is, let them. Why? From the Gemara Shabbos, that Achnos HaSarchim is greater than Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina. So even if you don't appreciate it, but they're be'etam doing this as a mitzvah. So that person, or you, become the chevetz of a mitzvah, similar to the Avtzei HaSukkah and to the Lulav. And you should be mechabit them because when they're doing this, because even if you're not taking in the covet, even if you're not drinking up the covet, because you're not interested in the covet, but they become a chevetz shal mitzvah. And, because they're using they're using you, so you use them, and they become a chefza. In your mind, they should become a chefza of a mitzvah. He goes weiter and he says that Lefia din ve'etem tashmisha kedusha need to go into gniza, but tashmisha mitzvah can be thrown out. The right thing is to be covered with them, like it says in Shulchan Aruch, Or Chaim Simul Chaf Aleph Sif Aleph, and this is what the Shulchan Aruch says. Chute tzitzis shenivsiku, a tzitzis string that ripped. Yochel azarkel la'ashper, you're allowed to throw it in the garbage. Mipnei shehi mitzvah she'em b'gufa kedusha. You can throw it in the garbage because it's not an actual mitzvah and there's no kedusha. Because it's a mitzvah and it doesn't have actual kedusha in it. Avol kol zman she'em kvuim betalis, but kol zman they're actually attached to the beged. Also l'shtamish behem, you're not allowed to use them for anything. You're going to look shabem shum davar, to tie a few things together, to hold something in place. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that because it's a bezayin for the mitzvah. Even after they ripped off, you shouldn't be noigam minik bezayin and l'zarkim b'makom to throw it in a not nice place. You don't need to put it in shemus. And some people attack medaktik to put them into shemus. Somebody who's machmer medaktik b'mitzvahs, he will be blessed. So it's mashma from the Lashon of Shulchan Aruch that he's talking about all mitzvahs, and not specific to mitzvahs tzitzis, because it says v'machmer v'medaktik b'mitzvahs tavel of bracha. So somebody who's not like this, so then his body, meaning this, that you're allowing this person to serve you, that your way of doing achnos asarchem, that's gedayla mekabalas pnei shchina. So that person becomes like a tashvish kedusha and a tashvish mitzvah, and he ends off lo yishlei to lov shemikra rabba davar. Nothing bad is going to happen to them, and v'yislein b'tzel shakai, and you're going to be married with the shechina. It's a good way of benadam l'chaveira. It's a good way of bringing the shechina into your house. And many times we have archim that are not so pleasant, but that's good for the mitzvah. That's your mitzvah of the day, as we say. Okay. Now, another thing is that we have to speak out. It's interessant Zach. We've mentioned before an idea that the oivim, the enemies, weren't able to be shaylet, to hold power over what Moshe Rabbeinu created, what Moshe Rabbeinu did. And it's a Gemara cites the Daftes, it's Kedai to know, Darsh Reb Chanina Bar Papa Darsh and Maitach Siv was put in the pasuk that says Rananu Tzadikim B'Hashem Laisharim Nava Sehila. What's put in this pasuk that the Tzadikim sing to Hashem Laisharim Nava Sehila for the Yisharim? It's nice it's beautiful that they sing Tehillas to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Al Tikrei Nava Sehila Ela Naveh Sehila, without the Aleph Aloshon Naveh, Aloshon of a house. Zeh Moshe v'David Shleisholtu Seineim B'Maseyah. This is Moshe. This is referring to Moshe Rabbeinu and David HaMelech, that the enemies weren't able to control their Maisa that they created. David D'chsiv Tavu Ba'ar She'areha. David, it says by the Beis HaMikdash that David built the Yisraelis for, that the Beis HaMikdash didn't get destroyed, but it just got swallowed up in the ground. Moshe Da'amar Marmisha Nivne Mikdash Rishon Nignaz Oil Moed. That when the Beis HaMikdash was first built, the Oil Moed was put into Gniza, Kroshav, Brichav, Amudav, Adonav, the beams and the hooks and the other beams and the amudim and the sockets. Heichal, where was it put away? Omer Avimi says, Tachas Mechila Shel Heichal, underneath the tunnels of the Heichal, there was a Gniza where the Mishkan was. So we see clear that the Oivim, the enemies, weren't able to be shayl, weren't able to have any power over the things that Moshe built and things that David started building. But we know that Eretz Yisrael belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So how is it shaykh a churban? If the Oivim weren't able to touch the Tzaddikim's things, so how is it shaykh that there's a churban in the Beis HaMikdash? Churban and Klal Yisrael should be chased out of Eretz Yisrael. Aber das steht beferish in the Psukim in Buchu Kaisai. V'alachti mi bekeri. And without Shemir Samitzvus in Eretz Yisrael, you're not going to have Eretz Yisrael. And as we like to do, we like going back to the Taisus and Gittin and Dafn and Hamid Beis. Asher Adam Afachei Tamid, the Gemara at the beginning of the discussion of the Chorban. The Gemara asks from Brachas that the Gemara says over there that this pasuk is referring to Hahubit the Rhetoric Siv. But Taisus explains that the people at the time of the Beis HaMikdash, at the time of the Chorban, were Batchu Arev Tuvasa. They relied on the greatness of the material wealth that they amassed, Vishalvasa, and the peace that they had, Levayishas Bar Kamsa, So they said that we could stand up against, people that we didn't think what they were doing was right. And they should have been afraid and they should have been concerned with the punishment. And you can't compare with a person who's just afraid, who has anxiety of no specific fear. What's this mean? So, we always say, the nusach that we always say is that if on September 10th, 2001, you would have asked somebody, could you believe the Twin Towers are going to come down tomorrow? I say, you're crazy, what are you talking about? But I think this was even more than that. This is the house of Hashem. It's not going anywhere, right? So you could say that they're Baitech, B'Rev Tuvam, B'Rev B'Shalvasam, and they weren't Baitech and Akash Baruch Hu. But I don't think that's right. A person could even say, I have a lot of mitzvahs, and I learned Torah, and he has a lot of schusim, and he even may be right about that. Meaning that's not really good to rely on your schusim. But they thought that everything they did was Iskahalten Api Halacha. Meaning this that they stood up for Bas Kesar, or this that they were Mavayish Bar Kamsa, they held that they were doing it Api Halacha. So in their mind, they didn't see what was wrong with it. I mean, when the Gemara says that the Lecharva Beis HaMikdash because of Sinas Chinam, the marshal is a guy's running to kiss a Sefer Torah Bashachas, but instead he tramples on top of 13 people and knocks down tables and it's a beautiful thing that you're showing your Avos Torah, but your mitzvahs ben adam lachavera also need to look just as flamfighted as your mitzvahs ben adam lamakom. It's not excusable to use that, to use people, so these people didn't realize that. They were so focused on the mitzvahs, they didn't even realize that they, like a person putting on his talis so much kavanah, doesn't realize he's whipping the tzitzis. He's whipping his tzitzis into somebody's face and hurting him. You have to be focusing on the people around you also. So that's a pshat. When we do mitzvahs, you have to make sure we're doing it right, and especially with Eretz Yisrael, which is Palton Shamelach, it's not a pasha tzach. V'atem, the pasuk continues. V'atem tavru chamushim. So there's a lot to talk here. We're not going to get into all of it. We're just going to go through a couple of nekudas here. The ikar makam of where we're going to discuss in Mitzvah Shem is going to be in Parshas Beshalach, which we have a lot of Torah there also, where it says, that they were chamushim alu. The Nezoscha says Stamas Avatim Tavru. It's going to be Havara Balma. You're going from point A to point B, like no biggie. Kila Hashem, Yeshua, Hashem's taking care. Hashem is running the show over here. There's nothing to be concerned. Okay. Zakti Yalkut Shemaini. Ein chamushim elam b'ziyanim. Chamushim means armed. Shenemar Vatim Tavru chamushim. This is our pasuk. Melama Shem b'ziyanim mechamisha klei zayim. This, if you know from here, that they went with 5 different weapons. Chamish Chumshei Torah, which is the pashtus of what we're going to see later. Tavaracher, Echamushim El Mezurazim. They had great anticipation to do this, and they were acting with great zrizus. Shenema v'yavub degad beruven chamushim karboim elef chalut tzava. There were 40,000 warriors that went for this battle. Tavaracher v'chamushim is echad mechamisha alu. We know that 1 out of 5 left Mitzrayim. Others say there's 1 out of 50. 1 out of every 500 left Mitzrayim. Reb Neroy says, he made a shvuah and he says, not even 1 out of 500 went up. Shenema revava kitzamach hasada. It was a revava. For Omer b'nei Yisrael parav v'yishrasu shahu yodesh yishu b'keres echad. But amrit echad mechomesh meis alu. So what's going on over here? He's saying in wonder. Not 1 out of 500 went out of Mitzrayim. It says Ravava Ketzamach Hasada. It says there were as many as the grass on the ground. And it says that there were 6 Bekaris Echad. And you're telling me that 1 out of 500 left Mitzrayim? When did they die? I mean, why is it that the numbers went down so much? The 3 days of Cheshach, Shanam Lerovish Asachiv, that they weren't able to see, so Shehu Kaivinus Messiah, they're able to bury these people quietly, peacefully, without the Goyim seeing them. And they gave Shlach Vedat HaKadosh Baruch Hu that the enemies, meaning Mitzrayim, weren't able to be Misameach when these people died. It was after 5 generations that day were able to leave Mitzrayim. It's interesting if you take a look at Yerushalmi and Shabbos in the sixth parak. The Yerushalmi says that they had Chamisha Osar Minei Zayin, and many changed the Girsa to Chamesh Minei Zayin. This place it says 7. So Shaila in the Girsa, we're not going to get into it, as we said. We're going to leave it for the Parshas B'Shalach. Now, what the Medrash says that 1 out of every 5 left Mitzrayim, it means that 1 left Mitzrayim, the other 4 died in Mitzrayim. So it comes out that each person that left was an adult, and there were enough. This was going on in each family because this was 1 out of every 5. And the Targum says, "V'kol chad im chomesh taflas liku b'nei Yisrael me'arad Mitzrayim." Parsh B'Shalach, it says that 1 out of one, meaning there were 6 children, and then 1 out of 5 died. So that's the mathematics over here. So that's a chamushim. There were chomesh mishpachas. And the Rabbi Michael Stern in his Sefer on Yehusha over here brings from Rabbi Chaim HaKohen Rappaport that's why Parah took 600 meis rechav to chase 600 chariots to chase after Bnei Israel. Why? Because the pasuk says, "Eicha yirlef echad elaf v'shnayim v'nisu ravava." How could it be that 1 person could chase 1,000 and 2 people could chase 10,000? Because when Klal Yisrael is given over and subdued by the Goyim, so then 2 of them are able to chase 10,000 Yidden. So according to this cheshbon, in order to chase 600,000 Yidden, you need 120 chariots. But according to what we just explained, that it was only Echad Mechamisha Yatsu, and 4 Chalokim of Bnei Israel died in those 3 days. So Parah didn't know that 4 Chalokim died. Because, as we said in the Medrash, that the whole concept of why they died then was that the Goyim shouldn't know. So Parah said he's going to need 5 times the amount of 5 times 120 chariots, which is 600, to chase after them to win them over. Now, so what ended up happening was that even with all his chariots, with his Sheish Meis Rechav, he all drowned in the Yam Suf anyways, and he was gone. Okay. Weiter. Rashi says, "Lifnei achechem kol gibori hachayil." Rashi says, "Kol gibori hachayil shabachem yavru chalutzim." All of the gibori hachayil from amongst you should go over armed. So it seems like that what was bothering Rashi over here is the lashon that it should have said "Va'atem gibori hachayil taru chamushim lifnei achechem." So Rashi is saying that Yeshua is telling them that only the gibori hachayil from you, meaning from the lashon miyut, should go chalutzim. So that's why the Nabi wrote it in this way, that we should know that not everybody in the Shevet is considered gibori hachayil, but only those people that were truly gibori hachayil, that those people should go. But you have to know if that's true, because it says gibori hachayil. What's that referring to? Meaning, because if they're not gibori hachayil, then they don't have to go. Meaning, they're not part of the Tanai. So how does that work? So the pasuk says later on in Paraches pasuk Gimel, "Vayivchar Yeshua 30,000 ish gibori hachayil." It says Yeshua picked 30,000 men, these strong warriors. That's mashma that these were the muvchar b'chayil. These were the strongest soldiers. And so before in the Memleis over there, like this also. And Moshe Rabbeinu says in Parshas Dvarim, "Chalutzim tavru, kol b'nei chayil." It didn't say kol gibori hachayil, or kol ben chayil. Kol choluf, the pasuk says, meaning even somebody that's. So again, we spoke that there are different jobs and different levels and different areas of where people can work in the army, but everybody's got to do something. And also, there's makom to ask why Yeshua changed the lashon that Moshe Rabbeinu says "Va'atum tabu chalutzim," and here he says "chamushim." So he says. So the Mefarshim bring a Medrash Yashirim that says that there were 60,000 chalutzei tzava from Bnei Gad, Bnei Ruvain, and 15,000 of them were Shremer HaKelim, and the other people were warriors. Meaning that there were people that were on the home base, and 15,000 were in the reserve, so to speak, and they were on the home front, and they weren't on the battlefield, and everybody else was warriors. Like the pasuk says later in Parak Dalet, Karbam Elef Chalutz Tzava Arvul Fnei Shem L'Melchama L'Arvis Yericho. Around 40,000 soldiers went to fight Yericho, and the Medrash is Mechiach over there that there were 44,000 that were fighting, and everybody else was Shomer the Kalim. As the Chayr Medurik from the pasuk in Parak Dalet, that 40,000 Chalutei Tzava. I mean, there may be discrepancy in the different things over here, but the point isn't in the numbers. The point is that these were the people that were meyuched. These were the warriors. These were the best warriors of all times. Otherwise, it wouldn't say Ke'arbu Amelech, Chalutei Tzava. Okay. The people that were so there were around 60,000 Chalutei Tzava, but the people that were B'Rosh HaMelchama, that were leading the battle, were 40,000. Those were the actual warriors, the soldiers that were actually doing the fighting. So that the pasuk says that Yeshua is telling Bnei Gad Reuven, Atam Tavu Chamusha. Anybody that's able to be a Chalutz B'Melchama, even if he's not from the Geber Yachayil, Afal PK, he should go with Klei Zayin. This is either that he should actually fight, or he should be, B'Shomer Kalim. So what does it mean to be Shomer Kalim? It doesn't mean that he sits and watches pots and pans and makes sure that they don't run away. But he protects the army base. He's like security in the army base that the enemy doesn't get to it. So that's what it says, because even the Shomer Kalim are helping and protecting Klal Yisrael, protecting the Yidden. But there were specific people that were B'Rosh HaMelchama Mamish, that these were L'fnei Achechem Kipshutai, that they were the ones that actually marched in front of everybody else. So that was specific to the Geber Yachayil, because it only makes sense that the strongest warriors should be the ones that are leading the battle. So that's what L'fnei Achechem is shaykh to the beginning of the words in the pasuk before, and to the words in the pasuk after. Ve'atem taber chamushim L'fnei Achechem, right? Or it's L'fnei Achechem Geber Yachayil. It could go either way. Meaning that these people had to be ready to help Klal Yisrael. And the pasuk continues and says, L'fnei Achechem Kol Geber Yachayil, which means that they're going to go L'fnei Achechem Mamish, like we said. And also that that it's specific to the Geber Yachayil. And we're going to be myself also that Yeshua was a man of the Melchama. So he didn't just say the Atom Tavu Chalutzim, but Yeshua was the actual general who chose and told each person specifically what post he was going to take, what position he's going to take, what he has to do. So these ones are going to be Chamushim, these are the Chalusim, these are the Chamushim, these are the Geber Yachayil. You go ahead. But Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't talking like this. Moshe Rabbeinu was talking about Klali that you'll go, you'll have to fight a war, and you'll have to go. But Yeshua was the general. The Haraya, we know this is true because when they were fighting against Amalek at the end of Parashas Beshalach, who did Moshe Rabbeinu pick to be the one to fight against Amalek? It was Yeshua ben Nun. So Moshe was not that Moshe didn't have the capability, but he just gave this job over to Yeshua, as we know from over there. So that's a Pshat in Chalutzim. Okay, then there's a kash about the different numbers of soldiers, which we're going to leave out for now. Okay, I think we'll stop here, and we'll be mamshech in a little bit.